بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah everybody, and welcome to session number 31 on Shia Imamiyya doctrine. We have reached article number 90 of this book. Last week we went through two or three articles, mostly dedicated to the hadith of Ghadir. Where were we in our discussion? We were talking about Imama, of course, and Khilafah, and the Shi'i take on all of this. We said that there's different aspects to this concept and different angles we can look at it. We reached the hadith of Ghadir. Now, as I said last week, and I emphasized really, that look, the hadith of Ghadir and the story of Ghadir is not something that we can just cover in like one session or something. If you really want to get to the bottom of it, it's going to take a while. Books have been written, there's a lot of back and forth, and we have to be fair that there will be answers that will be given and challenges put the Shia's way regarding the hadith of Ghadir and the story of Ghadir, regarding different aspects of it. And so we can't think that everything's set in stone and, alhamdulillah, we have something that will, not leave any excuse for others. Brothers and sisters, we have to understand that, there will be answers that will be given to us. But at the end of the day, the Shia believes that this is one of the clearest and most prominent proofs, textual proofs, let's say, of the Holy Prophet appointing Ali ibn Abi Talib after him. So for example, last week some people asked me like, Shaykh, why didn't you talk about this part of the story or that part of the story? I said, because the book hasn't spoken about that part of the story. The book just points at this and touches on it a little bit and moves on. What does the book talk about? The book talks about, what aspects of it does it talk about? First, it gave us the story and gave us the amount of the story that usually you will find in most historical books. Right? There are some extra parts of the story that you won't find in every historical book out there, in every history book out there. So for example, the brother that asked me a few days ago, he said, why didn't you bring this part of the story and say this part of the story, the part that goes that after the Holy Prophet actually delivered the sermon in Ghadir of Khum. He set up and pitched a tent for 3 days. People were coming to Imam Ali, giving him their bay'ah and telling him, Bakhin laka ya Ali, congratulations to you, O Ali, asbahta mawla kulli mu'minin wa mu'minah, that you have become the master, the leader of every mu'min and mu'minah, every believer. Right? These parts of the story, you won't find them in the main books of other schools of thought, brothers and sisters. We have to understand that. And so because you can't find it in their books, and even in our books, you won't find this in every source. Because of that, I think Ayatul Subhani has not brought it here. Once again, I have to say this, that look, just because it's not clear cut for some people doesn't mean we can't use it. Yes, Hadith of Ghadir is something that can be used, the best thing that we can use actually. But it will take some work. That's the point I've been making these past couple of weeks. It'll take more work than you would want to use it to prove to other people that it is a reason for and proof for the Khilafah of Ali ibn Abi Talib. We have to understand that. It will take some more work than some people think sometimes. There will be back and forth. There will be challenges. But at the end of the day, as I said, this is one of the clearest proofs that we have. Okay, so that's Article 87. That's what it was talking about. Article 88, we're still reviewing last week. Article 88, after telling us the story of Ghadir in a nutshell, very concisely, Ayatul Subhani goes and speaks about the chain of narrators of this hadith. Yes, the authenticity of it, in other words. And then what the wording that is used in this hadith implies when the Prophet says, Man kuntu mawla, whoever I am his mawla. We talked about that and how, we can't have a minimalist approach to the meaning and implications of this hadith for different reasons. There is evidence that we provided. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 reasons why he brought here in Article 88, why we cannot just say that, okay, he was just trying to, pass on, the Holy Prophet was just trying to pass on a minimal message to the people. No. It must have been something very significant. So we can't be minimalist here for these 5 reasons, he said. Yeah? Which I'm not going to go through because we went through them last week. Okay, so that was Article 88. Article 89 spoke about how, look, we have not only the intellectual rationale and also the textual, we also, hadith and sunnah, but we also have history as well, stories that we have of how the Holy Prophet, they would approach him, people from other tribes, in the beginning when the Prophet needed supporters. Yes, when he needed supporters versus towards the end of his life where he had a lot of supporters. Even in the beginning, when Islam is that desperate, for lack of better words, of course I'm saying that desperate to have followers, when they came to him, a tribe with power comes to him and says, we will adopt and we will take up your religion and embrace Islam, but there's a condition. What's the condition? That we are going to be your successors. It seems that this tribe had been able to identify that this person is a prophet and he's going to be big in the future. Let's make the most of it. Let's embrace the faith, but with this condition that we're the ones to succeed him. That was what their condition was. What did the Prophet say? The Prophet said, no, when it comes to the successor, this is something that is in the hands of someone else, not mine, meaning God. So historical stories, historical accounts also that speak of, that corroborate this idea of the Holy Prophet appointing someone through Allah appointing someone through the Holy Prophet as Khalifa. Okay, that is last week's session. Today we start with article number 90, which is, I really like this one. It says, look, even in the minds of the Sahaba, and the grand companions of the Holy Prophet, they knew that, and it was in their minds that the Holy Prophet has to appoint the next Khalifa, the successor to him. That this was not something to be left to the people and the masses after him. No. This is something that if the leader does not take care of himself, it can cause major chaos. Yeah? This is what Article 90 is talking about. What's going on here? What do you mean? What's your proof for this? That look, even in the minds of the grand Sahaba, this is something understandable and accepted. That the Prophet and the leader is the one to appoint, not the people to appoint. He says, look, let me read off of it, see what he says. Article number 90. The idea that the Ummah had no method for determining the successor to the Prophet was held by some of the companions. Yes? Instead of the designation of God and His Prophet, they followed the designation given by the previous Caliph. Yes? Each Caliph receiving his appointment at the hands of his predecessor, except in the case of the first Caliph. Right? So he's saying this idea was with the Sahaba too. That you have to appoint the one after you. The only time this didn't happen, he says, is with the first Khalifa, when the first Khalifa was appointed. He was, quote unquote, appointed by the people, it says. The idea that the designation by Abu Bakr of Umar. Okay, so he says something else here now. So I hope that's clear. Look, brothers and sisters. When the first Khalifa was passing away, right, history tells us that he appointed the second Khalifa as his successor. Okay? Umar ibn al-Khattab. When the second Khalifa was passing away, it's interesting, they say that, we'll get to that. I'll say it now. That Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, sent Abdullah bin Umar, the son of Umar ibn al-Khattab, to his father and said, listen, send my salams to your father and tell him, do not leave the ummah of the Prophet without a shepherd. Okay? So first Khalifa understands this, that you have to appoint somebody. You can't just leave it in the hands of the people. Second Khalifa understands this, or it is brought to his attention. At the end of the day, he accepts this, understands this idea that yes, I have to choose somebody. And so he puts together a council of 6 people that you've all heard of, for them to choose one amongst themselves, a group of 6 prominent, outstanding, let's call it companions, to choose one amongst them to be Khalifa after the second Khalifa, Umar ibn al-Khattab. Yes? So these grand companions understand, it's in their mind, it's in the back of their heads that, look, you cannot leave the people without a quote-unquote shepherd. You have to appoint somebody, or else there'll be chaos and anarchy. Yeah. Now here some will say, Ayatollah Subhani says this, he says, there are some who will say that, like for example, when the first Khalifa appointed the second Khalifa, he didn't really appoint him. He made a suggestion that people, if you would like, then you choose Umar ibn al-Khattab as your second Khalifa. Right? But there's an answer, he says, to this. He says, if this was just a suggestion, then why is it that we read in history that, for example, a person like Zubayr, who is uncompromising, he objects to this decision. He says, why does he have to be the second Khalifa? Well, Abu Bakr could have just turned back to Zubayr and told him, Zubayr, this is just a suggestion, or else at the end of the day, it's in the hands of the people. Don't worry about it. But that didn't happen, he says. No, it was not a suggestion. It was an appointment of the next Khalifa. Okay. I want to also read to you here what Abdullah bin Umar himself, history tells us, told his father. It's the last paragraph of Article 90. It says, even though there was a crowd of people at his father's bed, Abdullah bin Umar asked his father to appoint a successor, saying, people are talking about you, thinking that you're not going to appoint a successor. If a shepherd entrusted with the responsibility of looking after your sheep and camels were to leave them alone in the desert, without assigning anyone the duty of taking care of them, would you not reproach him? Taking care of human beings is more important than taking care of sheep and camels. So this idea, Abdullah bin Umar, of course, is also a grand Sahabi of the Holy Prophet. He's very respected in the Sunni school of thought. And so this is what he's telling his father in this account that we have here. So this idea was there, he says, Ayatollah Subhani. So that no one says to themselves, okay man, why are we so adamant about the Holy Prophet having to appoint somebody? This idea of appointing somebody, where is it coming from? This is unprecedented. This is something that people won't really accept. No. As a matter of fact, everyone is ready to reproach he who does not appoint a successor after him. This is really this is very, I find it, kind of offensive to the Holy Prophet himself. That his companions will understand something that he never did. That his companions will understand that they need to appoint somebody, or else there will be trouble. But the Holy Prophet never did such a thing, and he just left this world without appointing. If you remember, a few weeks ago, or maybe a month and a half ago, we talked about this as well. That the mainstream, in the non-Shi'i school of thought, there is a mainstream, and usually this is what you feel the mainstream is, that the Holy Prophet did not appoint anyone. Others say no, he did appoint Abu Bakr. That is not mainstream, it seems. But the mainstream believes that the Holy Prophet left it to the people. The question is, in this article number 90, how is it possible that the grand companions of the Prophet will understand something, but the Holy Prophet will fail to understand that? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up, really, with the personality and the smarts and the political smartness of the Holy Prophet. It just doesn't add up. Article number 91 moves on a little bit from the historical aspect, and now is going to get a little more analytical. It's going to talk more about how it works with an imam. What is expected of an imam? What are the responsibilities of an imam? We want to see what the responsibilities of an imam are. What he wants to get out of all of this, you'll see, is a theological conclusion. So he wants to analyze, he wants to go through all these responsibilities of an imam and get something out of it. Why? What does he want to get out of all of this? That we'll get to right now in a bit. He wants to get infallibility out of this. Remember, from the beginning of this chapter till today, what we're talking about, what we're trying to prove with all the different proofs and evidence we're trying to bring, from intellectual reasoning, from textual proofs, from history, from all of that, from common sense, is to show that you have to appoint. The predecessor has to appoint the successor. It's not just, hey people, you figure it out yourselves. He wants to even go a step further now and say, let's look at the responsibilities of an imam. When we look at the responsibilities of an imam, what we understand from that is that he has to be infallible, or else these responsibilities cannot be carried out. And if he has to be infallible, then that automatically results in the fact that he has to be appointed and identified by someone who can identify infallibility in people. How are we supposed to know who is infallible, who is not? Unless they bring us a miracle, or a person who's a prophet or an imam before them identifies them, introduces them as an infallible being. Okay? So that's what's happening in Article 91. He says, look, an imam has, let's see, how many does he list here? 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 6 or 7 responsibilities he lists here. Ayatollah Subhani. He says, at the beginning of our discussion of the imamat, we pointed out that the imam and khalifa of the Prophet, from the point of view of the Muslims, is one who is charged with the responsibilities of the Prophet, except that of establishing the religion. Establishing the religion, yes, is the job of the Prophet. But after that, after this responsibility is taken care of, the rest of the responsibilities still hold. We shall mention below the most important of these responsibilities. So it shows that there's more than these, but he's listing just the most important ones. The most important of these responsibilities in order to highlight the rank and significance of the imamate. Okay, number 1. Explaining the meanings of the Holy Quran and resolving its complexities was one of the responsibilities of the Prophet. As the Quran says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرِ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. That we have revealed unto ye the remembrance. Dhikr here referring to the Quran, of course. Remembrance meaning the Quran. Why? That thou may explain to mankind that which has been revealed to them. Okay, Prophet of Allah, your job is to explain the Quran to the people. Question: after the Prophet passes away, is there still a need for people to understand the Quran and the complexities of the Quran? Answer: yes. It is necessary. Okay, so we need somebody to take care of this responsibility. That's the first, one of the main responsibilities of an imam or the Prophet of Allah. Number 2, explaining the rulings of the Sharia. Yes, Islamic law was another of the Prophet's responsibilities, which he discharged partly through reference to Quranic verses and partly by his own actions, which we call the Sunnah. Such explanation was given gradually in harmony with the unfolding of daily events. Okay? So he's saying, look, the Holy Prophet, as the days, as the weeks and months and years went by, and new things came up, he would explain to the people what their responsibilities are towards those new issues that would come up and scenarios that would come up. Yeah? It's not like from day one he's gonna come out with a fat book of rules and rulings and tell people, this is what you got to follow, go figure it out for yourselves. No. As things unfolded, he would explain to them. Okay, now question. Question is, what about after the Holy Prophet? Are there still not going to be more things that come up and pop up here and there that are going to need an explanation of what the responsibilities, Islamic responsibilities, are towards those scenarios, different scenarios? Of course. Until today we're dealing with this. As time passes, there are more and more and more things that are coming up that we need to know what Islam's stance is on them and what our responsibilities are towards those issues. Yeah? So it's very clear that you need somebody to explain to the people as time goes by, as things unfold more, what the rulings are regarding what they're dealing with on a daily basis. So he says, during the Prophet's time, this is what was happening. After the Prophet, naturally, it's going to continue like that. The nature of this responsibility was such that it needed to be continued. For the number of hadiths of the Prophet regarding legal rulings does not exceed 500. This is very important as well, brothers and sisters. Let me explain this a little bit. When it comes to the things that we have to deal with on a daily basis, yeah? Those issues that come up. Is this haram? Is this wajib? What's the ruling on this? What's the ruling on that? We can go to the Quran, we can go to the hadith of the Holy Prophet. He says, look, when we how many verses in the Quran do we have? 6,000, I think, something. 6,200 something. 66 maybe. Something like that. I always forget that number. So 6,000 plus verses we have. But there are a lot of things we don't find the rulings of in the Quran. Okay, then we have to go to see if we find anything in the sayings of the Holy Prophet. How many hadiths, according to this, what it says in Article 91, do we have from the Holy Prophet? He says it's only about 500. How much is 500 sayings going to cover? Some of them might be repetitive. Yeah, some of them might be addressing the same issue. Some of them might be irrelevant to us. Yeah, after the Holy Prophet, they sometimes become irrelevant. Sometimes even, some hadiths by the Holy Prophet have to do with his time only, as is explained by the Imams who came after him. When people would cite those hadiths and say, well, the Prophet said this, the Imams would say, this is for that time, it was not for our time. Right? So this shows that there's a need to continue. Yes, this responsibility is still there even after the Holy Prophet passes away. And the number of hadiths we have are not enough to cover that. 500, look, we have 6,000 plus verses. We still have issues that are not covered by the Quran. Let alone the 500 sayings of the Holy Prophet. And this quantity of juristic traditions is insufficient for a comprehensive system of jurisprudence and law, he says. Yeah. Now someone might say, but the Quran says everything that you need you will find in the Quran. Yeah, everything you need you will find in the Quran, but that doesn't mean you'll find the ruling of everything. I want to find the ruling of smoking cigarettes, if it's halal or not, in the Quran, right? Where's the word cigarette in the Quran? You don't find it there. I want to see if, playing sports, I want to see if fantasy football, I want to see if this, I want to see if that is halal. These things are not in the Quran. When the Quran says you'll find everything in it, yes, I've explained this verse before in previous sessions, that the ulama have explained this verse doesn't mean that every single detail of life is going to be in there. Everything you need to know, even if it means that the Quran tells you, hey, when you can't find something in me, go to the Holy Prophet. Even that can be seen as something that covers a lot of issues, but not in detail. It's just letting us know, if you want to know, go ask the Prophet. Go ask those who know. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, another responsibility of the Prophet, the avoidance of divisiveness. Since the Prophet was the pivot of God's truth and he illuminated all matters such that any kind of deviation in the beliefs of the nation was forestalled, no kind of sectarianism saw the light of day during his lifetime. Yeah? So if a brother says Surah Al-Dukhan talks about cigarettes, he's joking, of course. That's funny, it's a good one. By the way, if you have any questions, brothers and sisters, you can just type them up right there. That's what the point of this platform, this live platform is. If you have questions, just put them there. Okay, so, let me get back on track here. What were we talking about? Yes, the Prophet, when he was alive, it says, because he is the origin and source of all nur and light and guidance, yes, his presence would entail the lack of divisiveness. And there was all this unity. So now the Prophet passes away, should that now go down the drain? No, the Muslims have to continue to try to be united and to try to flush out all the false isms and false religions that might come up and false prophets. How is that guaranteed and assured though? That is guaranteed through there being somebody who is the source of Islamic understanding, Islamic thought, just like the Prophet was. Yes. Number 4, another thing the Prophet would do. Responding to all religious and theological questions was another of his responsibilities. Yes? So somebody who comes after him to succeed him, question, do their questions stop and end after the Prophet passes away? No, as a matter of fact, their questions will be more maybe even sometimes. So this need will still be there, yes? And in effect, what? The responsibility of addressing that need will also be there. Okay. You will need somebody who can answer people's questions. Number 5, training his followers by means of his speech and his actions. 6, establishing justice, equality, and security in Islamic society. And finally, protection of the frontiers and the lands of Islam against its enemies. All of these are responsibilities of the Holy Prophet that he has to live up to. And they are responsibilities that will not cease after his departure from this life and this world. No, that these responsibilities are going to still be there. Someone has to take them and take care of these responsibilities. Who's that supposed to be? Can it be anybody? Can just anybody answer all the questions of the people? Can just anybody be the source of guidance and light for everyone to the point that all these other false ideologies will be flushed out? Is it just anybody who can explain the Quran and the complexities of the Quran and solve these problems of the people? No. Is it just anybody who can come up with the laws and rulings regarding issues that come up that weren't there during the Prophet's time? Brothers and sisters, he wants to draw a conclusion here. He says, some of the things that we talked about, okay, are, you don't have to have like a very, very important, infallible person to take care of them. No. For example, this last one was protection of the frontiers and the lands of Islam against its enemies. You don't need an infallible person to protect the borders, right? You don't need an infallible person maybe to establish justice and security in Muslim lands, for example. But the majority, he says, of what we covered needs an infallible person, he says. Once again, we're just, saying things very concisely and explaining them very concisely here. Each of these arguments has its own, that needs its own dedicated time to cover more, and the back and forth that it might have, right? So as I've said before, again and again and again, because some people might watch this later or listen to it, and they'll be like, but this, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that. That's fine. There will be back and forth. Whether you're Shia or Sunni even, it doesn't make a difference here. Sometimes even a Shia will say, hey, I disagree with this argument. I disagree with this reasoning. That's perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what our scholars want. They want critical thinking, right? So, but in a nutshell, this is what he's saying right now. He says that the majority of these responsibilities that persist despite the departure of the Prophet from this world are a reason to believe and to conclude that the one to succeed the Prophet has to be infallible. He says, now if the last two responsibilities can be carried out by a leader chosen by the people, it is obvious that the previous ones require a leader of exceptional knowledge and ability, one who, in his mode of awareness and of activity, follows in the footsteps of the Prophet, one who must be appointed by means of a special grace from God. He must bear within himself intimate knowledge of the prophetic message, and he must be free from all types of error and sin in order to discharge the aforementioned obligations and thereby fill the place vacated by the Prophet. But it must be stressed that such a person, despite possessing certain prophetic sciences, is not a prophet, nor the founder of a divine law. The rank of Imam never should be equated to that of a prophet. These two are not equal. So he makes this disclaimer in the end that, look, just because the one to take the place of the Prophet has such responsibilities that the Prophet did, doesn't mean that he's a prophet himself now. Just the fact that the only way most of these responsibilities can be fulfilled is if you are infallible, doesn't mean you are also a prophet. I think he is going to repeat this principle that I just mentioned later on as well. So I'm not going to go into it too much. All right. There are two conditions now he talks about, where he says, if there is such a person out there, okay, these things, these responsibilities have to be fulfilled by an infallible person. There are two things we need here. Just because there is an infallible person out there isn't going to help. Number one, which is clear, we've said it before, is that it is obvious that he has to be appointed by someone who can identify infallibility. Number one. And that's God, and by extension the Holy Prophet, or a preceding infallible, whether he's a prophet or an Imam. But number two condition, which is important as well, we have to understand, if this infallible person is out there, still it won't help. Even if he's identified, these responsibilities will not be fulfilled the way they're supposed to be fulfilled if the people also don't acknowledge this person's leadership. This is very, very important. We have to understand, when there is not an acceptance by the people, it doesn't matter if you're infallible. It's not going to work. It's not going to matter if you're supposed to be leader. You won't be leader. And that's what Ali ibn Abi Talib taught us. 25 years, the Shia believed that he was supposed to be leader, but he didn't lead. Of course he's the leader in our eyes, but practically that leadership has not been actualized the way it should have been. There was a barrier to that. There was an obstacle not allowing it to be actualized. So it's there. It's like when you want to, let's say you have like a cotton ball that you want to light on fire. Cotton balls are lit very easily, right? The thing is though, if that cotton ball is drenched in water, and is wet, and water is dripping from it, it won't light that easily. Why? Is the cotton ball the problem? No. There is an obstacle between the flame and that cotton ball getting lit, and that is the wetness. And so here also we have a problem. This is the leader of the people. He's been appointed, but for this to actually take effect, the people have to acknowledge it as well, accept it as well. If they don't, then this person cannot do what they need to do. And that's why we have this saying that La ra'ya liman la yuta'. A person that's not going to be obeyed does not have really an opinion to begin with, as if. They can't exercise their opinion because they won't be obeyed. And so this is also a very important condition here. So we narrowed it down. We said you have to be appointed, you have to be infallible, all these things. But at the end of the day, if the people don't want it, there's nothing you can do about that. Now, you have two options, either to, keep silent and wait for the right time to do what you need to do, like Ali ibn Abi Talib did for 25 years, or maybe even draw the sword, as some people would say, and, fight until leadership actually comes in your hands and you are obeyed. This is something that Ali ibn Abi Talib chose not to do, but others did choose to do. And by force and by sword, they impose themselves on the people. So the main issue, he says, is that the people, when the Holy Prophet said those words, and the Holy Prophet appointed the next Khalifa, the problem was that the people just gave preference and precedence to their own opinion versus the Holy Prophet's opinion. I see here and there, like sometimes you go on YouTube, you'll find some non-Shia sheikhs even, they do point this out. They say, look people, let's be fair here. Let's be honest. The Holy Prophet did say certain things and had certain expectations. The people felt like, they also know what they're doing. And so they didn't listen to the Holy Prophet. And so, but still, they won't really point the finger, these sheikhs, they won't point the finger and put the blame on them, but they'll say, hey, this was a mistake that was made, we have to acknowledge that. But at the end of the day, there were others who came and they took power and they also did their best, and we have to respect them as well. This, what I'm saying, although these are Sunni sheikhs, but this is not mainstream, definitely not mainstream. And we have to understand that as well. But it's interesting, you find this here and there as well. All right. I'm going to read this last paragraph of this article. The translation of the book that I have is not, it seems, is not the exact same edition of the book that I have here, the Farsi against the English. Yeah. All right, so I'll skip that part. There is one book, when Ayatollah Subhani says this, that look, the people at the end of the day, they said, hey, we also have an opinion, we'll just exercise our opinion. He says, look, don't be surprised. This is not the first time this is happening. There's a whole book, and this has been translated to English, and I think it's on alislam.org as well. Let me check real quick. It's a book called Al-Ijtihad wal-Nas. Or Al-Nas wal-Ijtihad. Yeah. Which translates to, let me see what they translate. Text and interpretation, it says here. I don't know. I don't know about the title, the translation. But anyway, it's a book by the famous Abdul Hussein Sharafuddin al-Musawi al-Amili. This individual, he's famous for his book of Al-Muraja'at, which is a book of that is actually letters that he was writing to one of the ulama and scholars of Egypt, who was Ahlus Sunnah. And these letters were going back and forth. What's beautiful about these letters is how much these two scholars, Shi'i and Sunni, are respecting each other and each other's knowledge. This is so important for us today. Our people have to understand this, all of them, Sunni and Shi'i, have to understand that, look, both sides have a heritage. We have to understand that. We will be very critical theologically of each other sometimes. Not all the time, sometimes regarding certain matters, mostly regarding imamat and khilafat. But when it comes to tawheed and all those things, usually the Quran, we get along pretty well in some areas. And so we have to understand that both sides have a rich heritage that has to be respected. These two individuals, Sharafuddin and the other scholar that he was in touch with and he was corresponding with through letters, they show each other very great respect. So that's in a book called Al-Muraja'at. So that Abdul Hussein Sharafuddin al-Amili, he has another book called An-Nassu wal-Ijtihad, which means the title, it's trying to say something here. We have a rule, a law, a principle, that when you have a nas, there is no room for ijtihad. What does that mean? That means when you have text, when you have the traditions of the Prophet and the Imams, okay? When you have that, there's no room for you to try to figure things out on your own anymore. If the Prophet has said something regarding a given situation, a given issue, there is no room for us to exercise our own opinion or understanding anymore, unless he explicitly asks for it himself. So for example, in the Battle of Ahzab, also known as the Battle of Khandaq, the Battle of the Trench, in that story, as you've all heard and have heard the stories of in Sunday school, that Salman al-Farsi, yes, also referred to as Salman al-Muhammadi, he suggested to the Holy Prophet how to secure Medina from all the different armies that were coming to destroy Medina. It was one of those battles that was the last hopes of the mushrikeen to destroy Islam, but they failed as a result of this suggestion of Salman al-Farsi, where he says, dig a trench around Medina to protect Medina. That's how we used to do it, he tells the Holy Prophet. The Holy Prophet didn't tell him, how dare you exercise your opinion when I'm here. No, he didn't say that, because the Prophet himself had asked for it. So it's one thing that the Prophet asks, but sometimes the Prophet says, hey, this is what's supposed to be done. No one's supposed to say anything after that. The Quran is very clear about this, that when the Holy Prophet passes a judgment, says something that you have to do or not do, it's set in stone. And the people don't have any choice anymore. They cannot exercise their will. Let me see if I can find this verse real quick for you. ما كان وما كان لمؤمن ولا مؤمنة إذا قضى الله ورسوله أمرا أن يكون لهم الخيرة من أمرهم. Surah Ahzab, verse 36. That a faithful man or woman may not, when Allah and His Apostle have decided on a matter, have any option in their matter. You don't have any more options or will. You can't exercise your will here because Allah and the Prophet have spoken. And whoever disobeys Allah and His Apostle has certainly strayed into manifest error. That's what the verse says. Anyway, let's go back to what we were talking about. This book is called An-Nasu al-Ijtihad. It is maybe, let's see here. It gives you, in this book we have about 90, if I'm not mistaken, to 100. Okay, it looks like he has about 90 to 100 cases or examples. Something between 80 to 100. I don't know, because there's some extra stuff here too. I'm not able to figure out what it is exactly. But he has about 80 to 100 cases where there was a nas, so to speak. There was text. There was a saying by the Prophet. The Prophet told this person, don't do this or do that. Yet they exercised their own ijtihad, their own opinion, their own understanding. So Ayatollah Subhani says, hey, if the people exercised, in the end of the Prophet's life, they exercised their own opinion in not taking what he said, don't be surprised, right? Because when it's the end of the Prophet's life, things have dragged on a little bit. The Prophet has become a little more, normal for people and stuff like that. Yeah? Things aren't too important for people sometimes anymore. Versus in the beginning when everyone's really willing to listen to the Prophet. Yeah? And when the going is tough and those who are in the religion are the ones who are hanging in there and are tougher than the tough circumstances they're in. He says, look, don't be surprised if at the end of the Prophet's life, people, they don't take it seriously. Why? Because we have about 80 to 100, I don't know how many cases where people, including grand companions of the Prophet, sometimes exercise their own opinion versus the Prophets. So don't be surprised. Where is that? In the book of Al-Nasu al-Ijtihad of Allama Sharafuddin al-Musawi al-Amili. Okay. And you can find that online too. Just AL-NASS al-Nas wal-Ijtihad. You'll find that. Just Google it. And then you can add a Al-Islam in the Google search as well, so it'll bring it up for you. Okay. Article number 92. He emphasizes on this idea of people. Yes, responsibilities of the Prophet. Persist after him. And so the person who takes up these responsibilities has to be infallible. He says, we say all of this, but know that this does not mean that that person is now a infallible being, is a prophet. Infallibility doesn't always mean prophethood. We have to understand that. He brings reasons for both rational, intellectual reasoning, and also textual reasoning for all of this. For infallibility and all that kind of stuff. Okay. We have a question here that says, is he Shia? I'm assuming the author of Al-Nasu al-Ijtihad. Yeah, he's Shia. But when he's going to use books to prove his point, he'll probably be using mostly books that are accepted by both schools of thought. Alright? So, article number 92 stresses on this again. Infallibility does not mean prophethood. Let's talk about infallibility a little bit. These are our proofs for infallibility of an Imam. Intellectual, textual. Let's go. He says, let's read. Article 92. In the previous articles, we pointed out that an Imam is not an ordinary leader who simply has to rule a country and protect its borders. Rather, in addition to this duty, he has other weighty responsibilities alluded to above that we talked about before. The fulfillment of these tasks, such as commenting on the Quran, explaining religious rulings, replying to theological questions, forestalling all forms of doctrinal deviation and legal confusion, all of this presupposes a comprehensive and inerrant knowledge. For an ordinary person trying to carry out such responsibilities would not be immune from sin and error. So this is what we talked about, he says. They have to be infallible. But he says, in isma, infallibility is not to be identified exclusively with prophethood. These two, it's not like these two are inseparable. No. For a person may be ma'soom, protected against sin and error while not having the rank of a prophet. I don't like the way he translates this. I'm sorry. Let me see for a second what the Farsi says. Yeah. So here when it says, in the Farsi, the translation is good in the sense of, the Farsi says maqam nubuwwat, which means rank of prophethood. I just want to say this, brothers and sisters, as Shia, in the Shia school of thought, we don't necessarily believe that a prophet, whoever he is, his rank is higher than that of an Imam that succeeded the Holy Prophet of Allah, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. No. Right? So when the translation is saying, while not having the rank of a prophet, I don't want you to think for a second that means that this Imam falls short of the rank of a prophet. No, not necessarily that the prophet is going to be higher. The Holy Prophet of Islam, of course, we believe is higher than the Imams, definitely. But previous prophets, like for example Prophet Adam, we believe as in the Shia school, and we have our reasons for it as well. We believe that no, the prophets who came before the Holy Prophet, they're not as high as the Imams that succeeded the Holy Prophet. But that's a different story. If this is mainstream Shia once again. But if someone doesn't want to believe this, doesn't mean that they're not Shia anymore. Yeah, they just don't agree with something that is mainstream right now. But as I said, there's reasoning and proof for that as well. But I'm not going to get into that. That's something not relevant to what we're discussing right now. Anyway, so when he says the rank of a prophet, doesn't mean necessarily that they're higher than them. No, just they're not prophets. That's what he's trying to say. Just because they're infallible doesn't mean that they're prophets. Okay, let's go on. A good example of this is the Virgin Mary, whom we mentioned earlier in the discussion of the infallibility of the prophets. If you remember, those of you who follow, I don't know how many of you actually follow all of the talks that we have, but way back when we were talking about the infallibility of the prophets, right now we're talking about infallibility of Imams. But back then we were talking about infallibility of the prophets. We talked about how there are some people who don't sin, who don't disobey God, who are very high and lofty, yet they're not prophets just because they're lofty individuals. One of them was the Virgin Mary, As-Sayyida Maryam, whom we mentioned earlier in the discussion of the infallibility of the prophets, in addition to the intellectual arguments already given. So that's an example. He says, look, Lady Maryam is not ever going to disobey God. She's pure, she's chaste, she's chosen by God, according to the Quran, but that doesn't mean she's infallible. She's a prophet now. So infallible doesn't always necessitate prophethood. In addition to the intellectual arguments already given for the necessity of the infallibility of the Imam, there are other reasons, some of which we mentioned below. Okay. So this is where he comes up with his reasoning for infallibility itself. I'm thinking to leave this. Yes, I'm going to leave this for next week. We won't be able to finish it. So I'm going to leave it for next week. So article number 92, we got into it. Article 92 has two parts. One part is, what he insists on, that infallibility does not equal and necessitate prophethood. After he does that, it's kind of like an introduction. And then he actually, it might have been better if it was just two articles, separate articles, these two, maybe. But anyway, he's divided Article 92 into two parts. Part two, he actually wants to go into the reasoning for infallibility of the Imams. He says, look, we have the reasoning for infallibility of the prophets that we covered before. In addition to that, we have more reasoning also for infallibility of the Imams. Both, let me see, intellectual and textual. The ones he covers here in Article 92 are the textual ones mostly. Yes. He doesn't get to the intellectual ones because those were already covered in prophethood. What are these textual? Some, let's say, of the intellectual. I'm going to end after this. What are some of those intellectual proofs? Textual proofs for infallibility of the Ahlul Bayt and the Imams that succeeded the Ahlul Bayt, that succeeded the Holy Prophet. I'll leave that for next week, inshallah. All right. So once again, I have to remind everybody that if it's hard to follow us live, and I know it is probably, who has time to sit down and watch video for an hour? Although I see there's a good number of people right now online, alhamdulillah. Good number is a relative term I'm using right now though. But yes, do keep in mind that the audio of all of these is also put online in podcast format, so you can listen to them on your way to work or back. Although some people were telling me that it's hard for them to follow because we go a little deep and it's hard for them to concentrate even when they're in the car driving to work or on the way back. But anyway, point being that we have all of this in audio format as well, podcast format as well, so that those who can benefit in that way or find it more efficient for them, that they can make the most of it, inshallah. Thank you very much. We'll pick up where we left off, inshallah, next week with the textual proofs for the infallibility of the Ahlul Bayt who succeeded the Holy Prophet. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.